All right, we're back. What's up, everybody? My name is Sunny Ray. This is the Sunny Ray Show. Today, I'm with Daniel Gold. Daniel, how's it going?
It's going good.
It's going
Sunny
good.
again here. Sunny again in California.
Oh, yes. I've got to make a trip out to California. I'm due for a trip. So, kick it off. Tell me, what is Castle Fund? What are you guys up to? And then, we're going to put that topic on ice for a little bit and come back to it. But yeah, if you can just share what you're doing there.
Yeah, so Castle Fund's a $20 million seed stage fund. It's my first fund focused on deep tech with wide intellectual property moats, or IP moats. The reason is I'm an ex-IP attorney, and I did partnerships that involved IP licensing for enterprises for about 12 years as well in biz dev roles. And this is a moment in time when AI is disrupting software so fast, people can't even keep up with the disruption. There's a lot of volatility, and I prefer going for strong IP in non-software fields, that I think will drive sustainable growth across this market cycle. So that's in sectors like biotech and energy and aerospace, the physical world. That's it in a nutshell. I had the first close in December. I made 3 investments, gearing up for a second close.
Interesting. Oh, I took you off stage. That was definitely an error. Okay, cool. So Daniel, like I said, let's slow it down a little bit. I was gonna ask you, I was reading about your background. So you studied computer science and music at Yale, then music, science, and technology at Stanford. So walk me back to the 18-year-old Daniel. What were you really after?
Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a diversion, but I grew up playing music, right? I played jazz saxophone, took classical piano lessons, and 18-year-old Daniel wanted to see if he could become a professional musician, basically, for a living. And I got into Yale, but I deferred for a year. I lived a year in Seattle, and part of the reason I did that was to play in bands and study music and explore that avenue before even going off to college. The other thing that happened that year is that I was very interested in biotechnology. And so my thinking was at Yale, I thought I was going to maybe major in biotech and minor in music, or maybe double major. But then I actually worked kind of like as an intern in a genetics lab at the University of Washington for a number of months, doing large scale sequencing and of the genome. And I decided I absolutely hated that day-to-day work. Like, I loved reading about what people discovered in biotech labs, but I didn't want to be the one who did the work. So that kind of settled that for me. And I get to Yale and I'm studying music, and I start studying computer science. And, Yale computer science is fine, but it was like, that was a switch for me. I wasn't, as I said, originally planning to do that. But, I'd always played with computers, played with video games early, programmed in BASIC and things like that as a kid in the 80s. So, I wanted to get really, really good at programming then. And this was when the dot-com boom was just starting. I arrived there in 1995. So it's like Netscape, Mosaic browser, era, right? And things were really taking off in the Bay Area, and there was a lot of news in the very first websites about that, but not as much yet in the East Coast, in the New York area, the whole .com online boom. And I had some friends on the West Coast, were at Stanford, and I knew that they had a killer computer science department, so I decided to transfer. And that's why, on my LinkedIn, my resume, it just sort of emphasizes Stanford. Stanford has a special program called Music Science and Technology, which is basically like the core computer science major, but then you can do these electives in your senior year that are all focused on professional audio. It's like signal processing, recording studios, computer music, things like that. And it's you're taking the classes at a grad school there. So I did that. I mean, I had a great education at Stanford. The AI course I took there was taught by Daphne Kohler, who later co-founded Coursera with Andrew Ng from Stanford, who, is now he's the guy that coined agentic. He's got an AI fund. He's on Amazon's board, and he was there. He was the head of the department at the time. So it was a great, it was a great time to be studying like early AI, long before the current machine learning revolution, but just and learning computer science there. So I'm glad I did it. And then I started a startup right out of undergrad in my senior year, and it was online radio. And I can say that I built a beta product that was actually in customers' hands. It was tested by customers, and I raised the first round. But when I was getting ready to go to revenue stage and scale, that's exactly when the dot-com crash happened in 2000. So that company failed. I merged the assets into another company called Music Mark, which is like another. It was more of a encryption company, but serving the media sector. So kind of like the way Microsoft ended up developing a lot of encryption for video. This is encryption for audio and video, basically. And then that company went down, failed to raise more. And then I ended up early at a third startup called Music Match in San Diego. And that company did very well. And I built one of the first online radio networks that had a subscription tier. Before that, almost like all the online radio was free at that point in the year 2001 when I built that as a product manager. And that product ended up being one of the key reasons why Music Match was bought by Yahoo, because they wanted to take that piece of Music Match and put it into another online radio product that Yahoo had. So that led to my first exit as an employee, not as a founder. I mean, I was fairly early at Music Match, but and that's really, so it all started from music and music technology, but that success after a string of failures is what got me really hooked and into the startup world.
Have you been tinkering with any of this, like Suno and these AI generative things in the music world?
I played with Suno and Udio like a year ago when they first came out, but I don't have much time raising a fund, and I have young kids, to be making music with them. And I became such an expert. I had a recording studio later too. I became an expert in Ableton and Pro Tools, and the main use for me of those would just be vocals. Like I wouldn't really need it for much else. I'm not much of a vocalist, but like to put in lyrics and have it sing, or rap or whatever, do the vocals. But everything else I would probably prefer to do myself. But I have played with them, and the speed at which they're getting better is amazing. But it's interesting to me because I feel like the quality is not evenly distributed. The same way that AI itself and the degree that different people use it is unevenly distributed. Some people are hardcore using ChatGPT and Claude constantly for everything. Other people just use it for some very targeted use cases. Others don't use it at all, right? I feel like certain genres of music and certain use cases, the output, at least when I was playing with it last year, was much stronger in some cases and much weaker in other cases. So you kind of had to play around with it to learn what it was good at, I guess. Like for example, I think it's very, very strong in the R&B genre for whatever reason, like 70s Motown. And a lot of the most popular AI tracks I've heard on Spotify and YouTube made with those tools are use that genre, or maybe use it as a sample in a hip hop context or something. Just to give one example. Yeah.
What was it like trying to sell people on paying for streaming music in 2001?
It was not easy, but we weren't charging that much at the time. It was mainly for higher quality audio and personalization. And on the personalization side, there was actually a lot of value there, because this is before any of the complete song on demand services like Rhapsody and now Spotify and Apple Music, where you could type in the exact song you want. That whole rights regime had not yet been granted by the record labels. So people wanted to get as close to that on-demand jukebox control as possible by either personalizing for listeners based on their prior listening history, sort of like Amazon, because you bought X, you might like Y, or by giving people lean forward control, but only at the artist level. So what I built there was an artist radio where you could type in 3 artists and then get, up to 3 artists, and then get sort of a custom mix built on the fly.
Interesting.
And that was as far at the time as the record labels were really willing to go without charging so much money that it would have been there wouldn't have been a business model to selling it. Now this all happened right before and then concurrently with Napster. And so Napster, the pressure from Napster really loosened the labels up. But I mentioned Napster because you said, what was it like trying to get people to pay? I mean, one of the primary reasons it was hard to get people to pay is what people really wanted was to hear the exact song they wanted. And since the labels wouldn't give anyone the rights to do that, they would just steal the music on Napster. Right. So it was competing with free on Napster was pretty hard.
Yeah. I bet. So I guess looking back at the producer, the lawyer, and the BD operator, is there one thread running through all of it?
The producer, the lawyer, the BD operator. Well, inventiveness and creativity is probably the sort of highest level thread philosophically. But I think, there's a common thread beyond that of just being interested in startups where you have a small number of people trying to do something that hasn't been done before and seems hard or challenging to do. There's a common thread there, but then the common thread evolved, so I went to law school in part because of my experience in building products as a product manager that involved content and copyrights and seeing how the law affected all the negotiations around the content and learning about that. And I think the thread really changed to be about just really deeply understanding intellectual property, not as just as a legal framework or concept, but as a business. Like, what is the business of making money from IP? That's the common thread that goes all the way through.
Actually, that was one of my questions as well. Is that I think you did BD at Amazon as well, PlayStation and Roku. So that's what 20 years inside the IP distribution and like licensing machine. So what did you learn that most founders never see?
What did I learn that most founders never see? Well, I think first of all, there's a lot of supply chain partnership angles to developing something small in the IP world than something bigger, whether it's content or not. And I think, there's different strategies to that. Sometimes it involves community. Sometimes it involves actually marketing. Sometimes it involves licensing IP and sharing, being open. I think there's a lot of education that we learned during that time in the media sector from the open source movement, actually, about and this applies also then to entertainment content too, of finding the balance point between giving away some value for free to build community and then having a pay layer on top of it. The whole freemium model, I think, is really been, every permutation of that possible has been tested in the media sector in the last 20 years. But I think it has application to a lot of other sectors too, frankly. So that's one thing. I'd say another is just learning about leverage between big companies and small companies, that, there can be something that a big company wants, but you have to, it's often not obvious on the surface. You have to spend some time figuring out what that is, because a lot of times you can't appeal to a logical argument. It's not like writing a brief in a lawsuit, to a judge. It's about, if the other party has a lot more leverage, a lot more power and money, they can just say no, or they can wait for an opportune time. So a lot of it's about understanding how to be a better negotiator and navigate those waters of extracting the information about what the counterparty really, especially if they're bigger and you're newer and smaller, what it is they think they can benefit from in the relationship. Why are they talking to you at all? Basically, I think a lot of founders, there'll come a point in time when they start out doing the get out of the room and talk to the customer, doing the lean startup method, right? Eric Ries, all these guys from the 2000s. And they're early adopters. They're very keyed in to the pain points of those early adopters before you sort of cross the chasm to a bigger audience. And they know how to super serve them. But then there comes this point in time in many different startup businesses, software or otherwise, when you're sort of going out to a broader audience that doesn't have the same acute pain, isn't an early adopter mindset. And you often need to change your tactics or else your acquisition cost is going to go way up. And you often need partnerships and you need channel and sales partnerships to do it. And I think that's one thing I've learned in that machine about the success stories is behind the scenes, there's always those kinds of partnerships that took like a mid-sized company into a huge company. They had to work with, it's hard for them to do it all by themselves to get to that bigger mass audience usually.
Interesting. That's so interesting. So when did you make your first angel check and what was the deal and what was the thinking behind it?
Yeah. So technically my first angel check was into Redfin, but the way that worked was I consulted with them. I was the first hire the three founders made before they hired any full-time employees as a product consultant because I had worked with the founder at Amazon. And before that, I worked at Amazon twice. Once was in 2004 as a product manager, then later for 4 years in biz dev. But the first time the guy I met was in the personalization team with me. He left just to be the CTO of Redfin. His name's Selly, David Seliger. And he let me have this option where I could take some of the consulting fees that we had set up and instead of being paid out, just convert them into like investing in the friends and family round, basically, like one of the first rounds. So he let me invest early, and that wasn't some sort of principled angel investment. That was, I think that these founders are super smart and they're operating at the cutting edge of this new, market. They have first mover advantage. I'm just going to bet they can figure it out. So, which is why I think a lot of successful angels, their first big win is like they were hanging out, they were friends with the founder. They thought the founders were smart. That's a pretty common story, right? The first more principled angel check didn't really come till a lot later. And I joined AngelList and I joined the Band of Angels. And one of my earliest ones was actually in a consumer product that actually didn't work out, although we got 1x our money back. It was called, it was like a hairstyling product called LUS Brands. And that also was a founder bet. It was like this founder scrappy. They've taken this from nothing to a certain number of millions of dollars with very little funding. They're going to figure it out. But then they did hit a plateau at some point in growth because sales and marketing got harder, for what I was saying earlier. Sometimes that kind of thing's hard to see. I also, one of my earliest was in deep tech. It was a solar play called Bright in Mexico. And then there was one that was a legal tech software where I was also an advisor. And they had an acquisition that was a pretty small acquisition, but it was an exit that I advised, so that was good. That was a software that was designed to make it faster to. I mean, this sounds funny now because this is pre-LLM, but it was to make it faster to negotiate certain types of legal agreements between companies where they're often high volume. There's a lot of boilerplate, like an NDA or something like that, right? And sort of know all the different kind of options for alternative clauses and swap it out and sort of eliminate all the negotiating time and sort of find the optimal case for both parties. A very, very primitive thing compared to what, Claude or Harvey could do now or something in legal tech. Another one was called Replay, and it was this. So a lot of times, you invest in what you know too. So I was investing in law because I knew law. I invested in a company that had an esports sort of tournament platform, like a software layer for making it easier for people to, like a tooling to set up and manage esports competitions. And I advised, because I had worked at PlayStation, I was working at PlayStation. I advised that founder as an advisor and also invested. And then they got bought by PlayStation. Actually, they got acquired. So that was a good result.
And when did angel investing go from being like a hobby to your main thing?
It was a hobby up until about 2018 or 19. Then I started to spend real time on it and money. Like I joined the Band of Angels, and I was on AngelList, and I joined like a couple hundred syndicates. I joined almost every syndicate on AngelList and just devouring all the memos and trying to come up with a thesis and a plan of how I was going to allocate the money. Almost like, at first it was just sort of like, okay, in your Schwab retirement account or whatever you have, Fidelity, you're going to have a certain amount in ETFs and a certain amount in bonds, and you have your asset allocation. I was trying to come up with, okay, I'm going to take this much of my net worth, my savings, I'm going to put it in startups, but I'm going to not just do it based on the fact that I think the founder is smart or that I know the industry. I'm going to come up with a plan that I'm going to invest this much in, in these stages and sectors, so on, right? And have it be more systematically diversified, I would say. So yeah, about 2019.
So you became a venture partner at Asymmetry and co-chaired digital media at Band of Angels. So what did running money alongside full-time VCs teach you that solo angeling couldn't?
So I guess a few things. One is the VC check is, well, so it depends on your check size. But if you make the assumption, when I was starting out in angel investing, I was doing 5-figure checks because, not so the kind of on the low end of what a startup would take on their cap table directly rather than in an SPV from an angel would be like $20,000 or $25,000 usually, right? And so that's where I started because I wanted to, get better at investing and learn and then grow from there. And at that check size, the one thing you don't run into is there's almost always room for you in the round on the cap table. You don't run into competitive dynamics. When you're with a fund and you're bringing 6-figure checks, let's say you're bringing $300,000 or $400,000 into a $2 million round, but they've raised 1.5 already, and so there's only room for 1 or 2 more investors of that size. If the founder, you might have had a couple of good calls with the founder, then you get on the phone to ask him another question. He says, I've got like 3 or 4 people who want to come in the round with a similar check size to you, and I can't take everybody. Then it becomes like Survivor, right? Then it's like they're gonna pick who they like the best or who they think adds the most value, and others may not get in at all. So that competitive dynamic is one thing I learned at Asymmetry, and so it became more important to proactively try and form relationships early with founders before they're raising, so that if they have a hot round, you can get in the round. That's one thing. Another thing is just like once you're working with more than one person, it's not just you. There's a lot of operational stuff of like how you summarize information and share it between me. I was a venture partner for Asymmetry. So between myself and the GP, we had, there's all the standard operational things about how you track progress. The same, there's CRM. It's instead of a sales pipeline, you have a deal pipeline, but you have to, track where things are in the deal pipeline and have, checklists of what remains to be done. I mean, all that kind of meat and potatoes, you don't have to do that as an angel. It's all, you can do it all in your head. Hopefully if you're an angel, you have some kind of standard diligence process that you're getting some bare minimum of information out of the company before you make a decision, but you don't have to formalize it in the same way when it's just yourself.
So they say SaaS is getting eaten by AI, right? And most VCs are pouring into the AI application layer.
Yeah.
But you're going the other direction, right? Atoms, molecules, orbits. Well, what are they missing?
Well, for one thing, the AI layer doesn't insulate you or provide you more defensibility from disruption. I mean, first of all, AI has a stack. So Now we already have above, above the base model layer like OpenAI and Anthropic, you've got applications, but then, even you could argue it's above or sideways too, but you now have the agentic layer where there's agents that orchestrate multiple applications, right? To achieve a task rather than just answer a query in a chat window. So first of all, it's like multi-level stack within AI. So it's like, which part of that stack are you investing in that you think can't be disrupted by someone else in the stack? But then also, even if you're at the same level, let's say you have an app. Let's say before Cursor and Lovable sort of emerged as like two of the strongest coding AI applications, right? Outside of ones vertically integrated already, like Claude Code, right? In the early days, before they emerged, like you could have any number of those sort of tools for having a software development environment, leveraging LLMs, and maybe your revenue is growing faster than any SaaS startup you've ever worked at before. But you still might not have made it because maybe by the next year, it's clear that like the center of gravity has become these top 2 or 3 apps. They're the best, right? And so I just think what a VC piles into that's hot in 2026 in AI app layer can be disrupted by another AI app in 2027 just as easily. I mean, the exception to that is if you're getting into deals that are backed by top tier funds that are multi-stage funds that have an incredible amount of capital, because then if it's A16Z or General Catalyst or something, they can keep that company alive for a very, very long time if it's running into trouble. They have the capital to do so, right? They can ride out if these companies get huge valuations because of the growth rate of their ARR. If that acceleration slows, but they have billion-dollar backers, they can ride out that time period and potentially figure out a way to light it back up again, right? So yeah, that's what I think. I went the other way because I want to know that when someone says this is the only thing that can do X or this is the first thing that can do X, they have patents and trade secrets to back that up. I want the IP to be really strong so that even if someone competes with them, that party might end up saying, well, their IP is so strong, we should think about buying them, just to be safe, right? Yeah.
So Castle Fund's a $25 million seed stage deep tech, right? With
$20
IP.
million.
$20 million. In 1 minute, what does a founder need to show up with to get a check from you?
Yeah. So there's 3 things that I think are beyond the obvious. One is, although I don't invest in AI, pure AI, applications, I do expect founders to be using AI tools to increase their speed to market. And some of the most successful deep tech startups in aerospace and biotech that I backed at Asymmetry have done just that. They've compressed the average timeline to achieve some milestone, in part using AI tooling. So that's one. The second is, I don't expect seed stage founders to have a large patent library that's already been granted, because that would take too many years from average time from pre-seed to actually get there. It takes 2 to 4 years to get a patent granted, right? And it would take too much of their pre-seed funding probably for them to have like 10 patents. But what I do expect is them to have a roadmap. So maybe they have 1 or 2 patents that they filed a provisional patent on, which gives you 12 months to file the full patent, for those who don't know. But more importantly, if their deck has a slide that shows a horizontal line that says, we plan to hit these product milestones in the next 3 years, and it's lined up with financing plans. We're going to get the Series A here, the Series B here. They should have that same line in their head for IP. Here's what we're going to develop and get a patent on in which countries. Here's what's going to be a trade secret, and how all that lines up is important to me. And the last one is, I like people that think in terms of the technology readiness level scale that is used in the space sector. So space is one of my pillar verticals, along with biotech and energy. But I apply that mapping to all the sectors I invest in. There's 9 phases, and it's a product roadmap, but it's like the way in which products are de-risked when they're sort of more technical and more frontier, where first you have components in a lab, you test the components, you verify they work, then you assemble the system in the lab, you test it, then you assemble a system and use it in the field. maybe that system doesn't have all the features your final commercial product is, but it's like 75% of the way there. Then you add more features, then you give it to a customer. The customer's still not paying for it, maybe, or they're paying a non-recurring fee, but they're testing it themselves. And then finally you get to commercialization. So that whole journey, it's like an act and three play. It's like play in 3 acts, right? It's like TRL 1 to 3 is like R&D in the lab. Okay, that's like pre-seed. TRL 4 to 5, 6 is like seed to Series A, where you have MVPs, but you're not really to scale into full commercialization yet. But you might be about to be doing proof of concept tests, or you're doing them, and that's where I like to invest. And then TRL 7 to 9 is like you're scaling your Series B and beyond growth stage.
And the pillars are biotech, energy, and aerospace, right? With robotics, chips, and AI infra as kind of example.
Yeah, I mean, so biotech and aerospace are where I have the most experience and where there's the most M&A activity, where you have mature companies that are buying startups frequently, and there's a small number of those companies, so it's easier to understand what the win characteristics are to make the sale. I'm talking about big pharma for bio, and then for aerospace, there's like defense and aerospace primes, right? But I think energy also has that characteristic to a lesser extent, but energy is complicated because it can also just be a horizontal, like enabling technology. Like there can be an energy component in aerospace, like a company that makes a new motor or jet engine for a plane. Is that an aerospace company or is it an energy company, right? So there's things like that. But so I think of energy as sort of a hybrid between vertical and horizontal. Same thing with robots. A lot of these robots are B2B robots that I would invest in that are, they're operating in a bio wet lab to validate data for a machine learning model for a biotech company, or they're welding airplanes together for the aerospace sector. So it's like it's a robotics investment, but robotics for the vertical of aerospace, right? Something like that. That's how I think about those as enablers rather than key verticals.
Daniel, if you're up for it, maybe I'll have you back on again, maybe a couple weeks down the road. But I have so many questions. All these areas are interesting. Sophia Space is putting data centers in orbit. You've got Arena, right? Solar panels that are 10x the power density. So which of these bets is furthest out and kind of like keeps you up at night?
Which of these bets is furthest out? Probably the data centers in space is the most frontier bet, and it fits. Even though it's the first one I made, it fits the goal of having stuff that can be purchased in 3 to 5 years in M&A. It fits that the least. But a lot of the IP is around thermal management, and that has applications. That has pretty broad applications, actually, even beyond the product they're selling now. So it's, in a way, I think of it as a hybrid between space and energy, I guess you could say. But that one keeps me up at night because they're not competing with SpaceX and Blue Origin and other giants. They want to sell picks and shovels to them, but they are in this sector that has these giants in it, and the giants, could decide to build things themselves or could take actions that make it harder for Sophia Space to compete. So I feel like there's more volatility and more black swan possibilities there. I also think that there's 2 steps to that company. Right now, there's a lot of demand for edge processing in space for things that are happening in space. So that's like for Golden Dome defense. The US government wants to defend against hypersonic missiles, for example, or it's Earth observation for commercial purposes, but you need to be able to process it faster in orbit rather than send it to the Earth and get it back, right? There is actually ample revenue demand there to build a unicorn today. And so that's what I think a lot of the debate's missing today about data centers in space, but they're missing it for a good reason. It's because Elon and Google and others are out there saying, we're going to take cloud data center business that's on Earth, and at the margins, instead of building one more cloud data center on Earth, we're going to build it in space. which is, you see what I'm saying? It's different. It's taking the compute you wanted on Earth, doing it in space, and sending that data back to Earth. That is not the original, the first money that Sophia Space is going to see. It's certainly the far bigger potential outcome, but there's a big debate on whether that outcome happens in like 2035 versus 2045, right? So I think like there could be a much longer horizon to that, depending on what happens with there's a lot of things that have to happen in parallel for that to happen. You have to build higher bandwidth of communication between space and Earth using lasers. You have to have higher penetration of lasers on satellites. A lot of the communication today is radio frequency from satellite to Earth, which is slower and has more interference. It's narrow, less broad. You also have to have better maintenance of stuff that's in space, more robotics. You also have to have better energy in space, which is, in terms of solar, you have to be able to generate more energy in space if you're going to do all that compute in space. So there's a lot of things that have to all go right for it to meet the timeframes, I think, that that SpaceX is advertising. But that doesn't mean, even if it's 5 or 10 years later, it could still have a tremendous impact on civilization. So it's still exciting to me.
Cool, Daniel. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And I guess we're at the end of it. So like I said, would love to have you back on in the future and keep geeking out on some of these topics. It's a very, very fascinating thesis you formulated. And and I wish you the best of luck. So with that said, I'm going to bring this one to a close. Thank you all for tuning in, and until next time. Cheers.
Thanks.